Thank you, Lloyd. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, board members, and guests. It's always fun to come out to Wyoming, to a place where we actually have water. We're having a few issues in California right now with our water situation, but it's always a warm place, notwithstanding the weather outside. Although it was a balmy 36 this morning, so that was good for me coming from California. Thank you again for having me. California continues to, I would say evolve, but maybe for some of you it's more like devolve in our thinking with renewables. But wherever there's complexity, there's always opportunity, is what I like to see. And that was something that was drilled into me in the U.S. Army. So courtesy of the U.S. government, I see things in the positive. There we go. So I always like to start with a view of government, because government and regulatory process is hopelessly intertwined no matter where you go. And when you start to accept that and work with it, especially in the energy sector, you start to have a little bit more success. It's been my experience in the work that I've done with permitting work in California and throughout the West, that when you can figure out what's going on in government and couple that with what regulatory hurdles you need to overcome, you start to identify the right people to go talk to. And what Lloyd's talking about, the effort that the Wyoming Infrastructure Authority has done over the course of the last couple of years, and even just the last, I would say several months, 18 months, it's been incredible. The amount of meetings that have occurred, the amount of information that's been shared, and just looking at what was just presented, and a lot of what was presented over the course of yesterday, I think it's very important to share, and share again. I think that even in Wyoming, you have had the experience of what I have in California, which is sharing information, especially critical information like what you have with some regulators and some legislators. I'm not going to paint them all with the same brush, but some of them have the attention spans of houseflies. And so you got to repeat it. You got to keep coming and talking to them, otherwise they won't listen. Let me talk about California a little bit. So Governor Brown came back for an unprecedented third term, 36 years after his last term. A couple of years ago, I shared with you that was happening, and we couldn't imagine him coming back, but he did. And now he is shoo-in for a re-election unless something really crazy happens. I don't see that happening. He's super careful, and so he should win a fourth term record. That was the third term was a record. The fourth term is something that I think will be very difficult to eclipse by anybody. He is 75 years old now, so he keeps saying that this is his last go around. That's what we heard 4 years ago. So we'll see where he goes. He might continue to be there. There are two things that he's really focusing on. High-speed rail. So we want to build a high-speed rail train from Southern California or Northern California, or Northern California or Southern California, depending on how you view it. The problem is financing that. It's supposed to cost about $96 billion with a B, and we have about $6 billion ready for that. It's hopelessly entangled in litigation, and for any of you that have ever been entangled with litigation involving government, you know how long that can take. So one of his priorities for this year probably doesn't happen. I think that high-speed rail is going to be an issue that's around for his next term, and then he'll spend 4 years working on high-speed rail. It is a legacy issue that he's looking for. His father, who was governor of California also in the 60s, built water canals from northern to southern California. So the next issue, water tunnels, a little bit different, but it's kind of following up on and maybe even finishing the job that his father started back in the 1960s. Water, of course, is a major issue. Just yesterday there was a report that said that California may be suffering from our worst drought in 500 years. This morning there was a report that said Sacramento is definitely now at its worst place water-wise in 130 years. So Sacramento is important because that's the capital. So if legislators, remember they have the attention spans of houseflies, are reading this morning in their paper, they'll only read the headline and maybe a couple of sentences. That's what they're going to focus on. Oh boy, we really do have a problem. So maybe we do push water bonds this year, and we work on figuring out how we're going to fix our drought. How does that relate to energy? Well, droughts mean crispy conditions outside, as I like to call them. The last couple of years, we've had some very significant fires in California. The lucky part for us has been so far that nothing under major transmission lines is burned. The problem is that that's still out there. So there's a lot of fuel for fires. It's very dry. It's going to be very easy to spark a major fire. We had that happen back in 2007, 2006. It created a little bit of a blinking problem on our grid. So when we have the grid blink, that's not a good situation for legislators, and especially in an election year, you don't want to have that, and you don't want to see that. We're going through some major changes, but of course, like I said, the governor will get reelected, no problem. The legislature is a whole different story. We're in a cycle where we are transitioning because of term limits in California. A number of the folks that have been around for a long time are now having to leave office. They're termed out. So we're going to see a change at in the legislature, in the Speaker's office, and in the President's office. And those two have been identified, but we won't see that change happen until after the budget is squared away sometime in June. June 15 is when our budget is supposed to be in place. Usually takes us an extra month in California. We're never on time. So by about July 15th, we'll have a budget in place. And I don't see it going longer than that. We will have 2 new leaders in the legislature. And the important thing to look at there is how long have they been around and what do they know about energy and power for the sake of our industry. Both of them have not been around. Both of them come from city governments. And so the best memory that they have of energy is the energy crisis in 2000, 2001, when everyone was suspicious in the energy industry. So we always have to keep that in mind when we think about who's our next leader, what is their experience with energy. The presumed leader of the Assembly is Assemblywoman Toni Atkins, and interestingly, she comes from a coal background. Her father was in the coal mining business, so hopefully, cross our fingers, that she's going to be friendly to energy. On the other side, I'm not so convinced. We have a member who's on the Senate who's already pushed for decarbonizing the energy sector, so we're a little bit worried about our potential Senate leader. Looks like they are shoo-ins to be elected, so I'll come back later and give you an update on how that goes. There's an FBI investigation going on. There's a senator who unfortunately took some money from an undercover FBI agent while he was in the state capitol. Big problem. The big question is who else is involved in that whole mess, and the investigation will probably go on for years. The last time that we had that kind of scandal in California, the investigation lasted 3 years and a handful of people went to jail. So that's going to be something that you'll read about probably later on. Democrats are in control of both houses. In fact, they're in control of all of the constitutional offices too. So there is a left-leaning California in our leadership as well. And remember, the importance to the legislature is that these guys are responsible for selecting our regulators. And so that's why we want to keep track of who's in charge in the legislature, because that's going to determine who's in charge at the regulatory agencies. I want to talk about that next. I want to talk about legislature first, but there's an interesting situation going on at the PUC. Commissioner Michael Peavy's been there for some time, came out of the utilities, was at one point an executive at Southern California Edison. The presumption was that he was going to retire at the end of this year. This is his second term. And I think that he even hinted at that. Little wrinkle to that whole situation. Unfortunately, we had some very sad news 2 weeks ago. Commissioner Mark Farron resigned. It was not expected. He has been battling cancer, unfortunately, and the situation has gotten a little more serious, and he's decided, I think, smartly to take care of himself and be with his family and deal with his condition. So we're going to have a vacancy, and we are supposed to have another vacancy in the presidency. So what does that mean? What I think it means is that Michael Peavy is going to stick around. Doesn't mean that he needs to serve a whole an additional 5-year term, but it seems fairly easy that the governor would nominate him again to lead the commission for another 5 years. Again, it doesn't mean that he would serve another 5 years. I think he just needs to be there to help stabilize the agency, the commission, as time moves forward and as the governor has an opportunity to, between now and an election and other work that he's got with his legacy items and other unforeseen issues that could result in California, to find the right person to succeed a potential president. It's always, the thought is that the potential is that the nomination would be the next president as well. The governor nominates and the governor also selects the president of the commission. It is approved by the Senate. First the Senate Rules Committee and then the full Senate votes on them. But typically what we've had is we've never had a controversy where the governor nominates and the legislature says no. We haven't had that in California ever. So I think that we watch this very closely to see what happens. Again, my best guess for you today is that Michael Peavy is going to continue and we're going to see somebody come up through the ranks. It could be a former legislator, that's the rumor. But we'll wait to see what happens. Is it going to be one of the current sitting commissioners? I kind of doubt it because they are all fairly new and fairly young in one case. Probably it's somebody from the outside. So we'll watch that very closely. New CARB chair. This has been a rumor for a long time, but I think she's finally getting tired. And the fact that CARB has pushed through cap and trade and they've had some very successful auctions that have resulted in meaningful income to the state that the legislature is clinging to and is borrowed from. I think that Mary Nichols' time at the Air Resources Board is probably coming to an end soon. So we're going to have some major changes on the leadership side. And that, again, leads to potential changes on where regulation and where legislation might go for energy. This is a big slide, a lot of words in here, but I had some good feedback on this from the last couple of times that I've had an opportunity to talk to you. And the comments I got was, maybe you can just update that. And so I changed some colors around for you, and I want to focus on a couple of things. In the legislative section, you'll see that in the green, the very first one, environmentalists pushing for 50% RPS. This has been talked about since we established 33% RPS back in 2010. That 33% was not a ceiling, it wasn't a floor, just someplace good to start with. Well, we started with 17%, then we went to 20%, then 33%. Now environmentalists are saying, hey, why not 50%? I was in a meeting at the CEC with one of the newest commissioners, and Commissioner David Hochschild confessed to me that he was the one who put 50% into the governor's ear. He said 50% RPS is doable. I'm still scratching my head on how that's possible. But I didn't have to scratch my head very long. The red section, 2 down, the IOUs and the POUs are pushing to hold the line on 33%. This is a brand new report. It came out 3 weeks ago. This report says 33%, and it was produced for the utilities and the POUs by E3. I understand that NREL was involved. I understand that a number of other very prominent consulting firms were involved in this report. It's 300 pages of very light reading, I assure you. I've gone through it a couple of times. The bottom line here is that 33% is kind of an optimal number, according to the report. Above 33%, it's very expensive, it gets very complicated, and so 33% might be the right number. But there's a big but here. Last year, Senate Bill 327 gave authority to the PUC to order the utilities to go beyond 33%, and that's up to the commission. So there is an ability to go above 33% already. Will that happen? That's up to the PUC. But between now and that, what happens with this report? Obviously, the utilities paid a lot of money for this report to be produced, and my view is that you don't produce that kind of report without later shopping it for potential legislation or regulation or some kind of policy to come from it. It's a very thorough report, and again, it says RPS 33% and above is very expensive, very complicated, very convoluted. So what the utilities are really asking for is flexibility. Now, that's a very important word, flexibility, for Wyoming, because till now, under the current RPS regime, there are limits on what can come in from out of state and how we manage our ability to move power from out of state into California. If this results in a change in policy that allows the utilities to have greater flexibility in how they're going to meet their RPS standards going forward, whether it's 33%, 33% plus, 50%, up to 50%, if they have flexibility, it's achievable. And that's something that we have been talking about. You know, can you go beyond 33%? Sure, but you have to be smart about how you're going to do that. Is it cost effective? And where's it going to come from? Did California exhaust all of our possibilities with solar? Depends on who you talk to on that front. I'm going to go really fast through the rest of it. Lloyd had asked me to talk about the SONGS situation. SONGS is shut down. The other nuclear reactor that we have in California is in Diablo Canyon, which is south of San Francisco. That one was supposed to have started its relicensing process 3 years ago now. It's on a 4-year delay. There's seismic studies that are being done that were required by the PUC. The NRC is involved in that discussion as well, but that relicensing is on hold. The problem with one large nuclear facility being down and only having 2 in the state is that the anti-nuclear crowd is now only focused on 1. So are they going to try to shut down the last one standing in California? Yes, they're already involved in that process. There may even be a proposition in the 2014 election cycle on the ballot that says, let's get rid of nuclear altogether, it's too dangerous. That's the way people are thinking in California. So again, the opportunity around that is we won't have 2,200 megawatts to replace, we'll have 4,400 megawatts to replace. The PUC has, in a discussion on what are we going to do with replacing that amount of megawatts, has said out loud, we want half of it to come from renewable power and half of it to come from natural gas. So at least that's the answer for SONGS. 1,100 megawatts potentially from natural gas and 1,100 from what we call in California preferred resources. Rooftop solar, large solar, wind, anything renewable. Energy efficiency, demand response, that's the preferred list. And it is in statute, so it is in a loading order that we have to go by, so at least half of it. So if we were to lose the other one, it's also 2,200 megawatts, we'd probably get the same thing. Let me think of the other major issue that I wanted to share with you. Joint Reliability Plan at the very bottom under the CAL-ISO. That's an effort by the PUC and the ISO. This is a major undertaking to figure out how are we going to integrate all of these major policies that we have at play in California. Another good feedback that I got last year from last year's presentation was this slide. I put in a box all of the major policies that are going on in California. As you can see, we hardly have anything going on in energy. Assuming we didn't have anything else to do, this would consume all of our time. Of course, we're going to be complicated this year with a drought and what we're going to do about that. It is an election year, so we do have politicians running around trying to figure out where they're going to stake their claim on energy and the environment and how we're going to keep our lights on. It is somewhere in the back of their minds. I don't think that we start worrying about that politically or from a regulatory perspective until we see one of those first major fires under a transmission line. So we have a lot of work to do in California. There's so much to do. We've gone very aggressive, I've said this before in this forum, on carbon and on renewables. And now one of the major concerns for this coming year legislatively is how are we going to manage that greenhouse gas reduction? Some of what y'all talked about yesterday I think is impactful to California, and hopefully California will be listening to a lot of the good work that's being done in Wyoming with carbon capture. California has a 2020 greenhouse gas reduction goal. We have to reduce our greenhouse gases to 1990 levels by 2020. There was a report at the end of last year by the California Air Resources Board that said 2020 is doable, but we also have in place a 2050 goal. What they said about that was 2050 is not doable. 2050 is not doable unless we completely decarbonize the energy sector. No gasoline, no natural gas, no oil. Not happening is really what the answer there is, right? So we have to figure out another way. So if flexibility from the report that that the utilities had commissioned on this slide generates policy, I think the answer is to help figure out how we're going to manage that 2020, 2050 greenhouse gas reduction, and the policy will be to figure out something in the middle, a 2030 greenhouse gas reduction goal. And that's what's coming from a legislative standpoint. So energy-wise, it's going to be more focused on how are we going to reduce our greenhouse gases. They've already hit the low-hanging fruit. The power sector in California was already pretty darn clean. There is no coal. We have natural gas that's pretty efficient, pretty clean. We had nuclear, because we lost half of it, and we may be losing the other. So the big concern is how are we going to manage greenhouse gases. Obviously, the transportation sector is major in this role, and that's where the majority of the greenhouse gases come in California. The regulations impact transportation fuels in 2015. So a lot of work on greenhouse gas reduction, a lot to learn, lots of opportunity with lots of problems in California. I'm going to stop right there, but thank you very much.